Maple Ridge prided itself on character. Manicured lawns, matching shutters, and laws so exhaustive they seemed to govern even the wind's movement. Everything about the area spoke of careful design and constant control, from the uniform curb appeal to the quarterly publications embossed with the sparkling logo of the HOA. But beneath these layers of order, life thrummed in subtle acts of resistance. Sunflowers growing higher than permissible fence lines, rain barrels tucked behind azaleas, and a quiet buzz emanating from the Jensen family's backyard, the soft hum of healthy bee colonies. The Jensens were not radicals. They were ecologists at heart, parents of 2 inquiring children, striving to make their part of Maple Ridge greener and more sustainable. The bees were never concealed, but neither were they flaunted. Neighbors stopped to admire the hives in the spring, lingering for a taste of the honey that glistened in recycled jars. As the years went on, the backyard evolved into a mini ecosystem. Herbs, wildflowers, veggies, and pollinators weaving a tapestry that stood apart from the common, barren turf. The neighborhood adjusted in tune with the Jensen's bees. The Honey Collective began simply. Summer picnics filled with honey-drizzled scones and casual transactions among homeowners for homegrown fruit and golden sweetness. Even skeptical neighbors softened. School children submitted essays on pollinators, while older inhabitants remembered the orchards and natural gardens of decades past. Slowly, a spirit of eco-friendliness penetrated Maple Ridge, spoken through compost bins and edible planting. But change rarely comes without conflict. In the spring, a new HOA president ascended to power, Mr. Sims, a retiree whose devotion to bylaws eclipsed even his desire for order. Sims' first act was a wave of reminders on property uniformity. His second was the prohibition that would transform the community's future. Effective immediately, all backyard apiaries are strictly forbidden. Owners must remove hives within 14 days or face fines and potential legal action. The letter arrived on crisp paper, couched in legalistic language and backed up by threats. Property values were at risk. Bee stings harmed children and pets, and unauthorized farming activity depressed the tone of the community. Residents were advised to remove their wildflowers, reseed lawns with HOA-approved grass, and shutter their rain barrels. The tone was clear. The natural order would be supplanted by the HOA's agenda, no matter the cost to its quiet dissidents. The Jensens felt the impact in crushing waves. Fury at the loss, sorrow for the bees, and a gnawing concern over what would follow. Their initial reaction was open opposition. They sent impassioned emails and attended HOA meetings, pleading with reasoning and science. Their voices joined those of neighbors who knew what was at stake: food security, biodiversity, and the sense of connection that had bloomed with the neighborhood's modest acts of green rebellion. But logic met deaf ears. Sims and his associates brushed away ecological concerns, citing insurance clauses and a vision of pristine lawns and silent yards. Fines arrived, warnings proliferated, and the community's once bright spirit began to wane. For many, the death of the bees represented the loss of something ineffable: a trust in the future, a belief that Maple Ridge might be more than just another grid of regulations. Yet, under difficulty, innovation grows. The Jensens, beaten but undeterred, drew inspiration from their bees, creatures who thrive in networks, hidden from people who do not know where or how to look. They reached out in code, hushed messages handed over backyard fences, encrypted group chats, and neighbors gathered in garages to trade seeds and support. The Honey Collective, forced underground, became more than a hobby. It was a symbol of everything Maple Ridge risked losing. The next weeks saw an outpouring of creative revolt. Yards were surreptitiously altered with permaculture secrets. Rainwater systems resurfaced in concealed barrels. Native wildflowers bloomed behind hedges. The beehives, away from plain sight, took refuge in inventive places: rooftops, garden sheds, and the private nooks of supportive neighbors. Honey flowed more surreptitiously now, but in greater abundance, reinforced by a sense of shared purpose. Sustainability did not vanish. It transformed, finding resilience in cooperation and concealment. The chapter finished as Maple Ridge stared down a new paradox. The harder the HOA pressed its restrictions, the deeper the neighborhood's roots grew in defiance. An impetus toward green living had switched from broad celebration to silent revolution, laying the groundwork for a viral movement and local transformation that not even the HOA could predict or contain. Next, the honey collective blossoms in secrecy. Locals connect off the grid, and the HOA faces a wave of eco-activism that spirals beyond Maple Ridge's meticulously manicured limits. As the crackdown settled over Maple Ridge, the attitude evolved from nervous compliance to calm complicity. The bee prohibition, supposed to root out the hives and restore the HOA's image of order, had instead planted the seeds of a hidden revolution. In the early hours before morning and after dusk, yards flashed with new activity. Neighbors wheeling out hidden pots, erecting trellis tunnels from reused pallets, and whispering reports about hive health and newly hatched queens. Word about the hidden honey group moved in shadows and code. A text message linked the block's gardeners with rooftop beekeepers. Emails circulated under vague subject lines, offering tips on natural remedies and liquid gold. Back doors became portals to shared abundance. Glass jars tucked inside flower pots. Envelopes of heirloom seeds exchanged for promises of pollinator sanctuary. The old limit of fence lines decreased in significance, replaced with pathways, literal and virtual, containing the heartbeat of a new community. Children, ever attentive, matured into jobs as couriers and documentarians, entrusted with documenting flower blooming and watching for patrolling Sims loyalists. School science programs surreptitiously featured bee counts and water collection, with data entered in spiral notebooks that never found their way to the principal's desk. The wild honey, now bottled in simple glass or mismatched mugs, imbued kitchens with a flavor both sweet and subversive. This was not simply food, but proof of resilience. The movement blossomed with creative adaptation. Solar panels sprouted atop sheds, hidden among rows of growing ivy. Composting buckets split into two, one for show, one for real, each feeding secret vegetable gardens shielded by decorative grasses. Water barrels took on the look of garden statuary, their valves hidden deep and accessible only to those in the know. Yards that had long been carbon copies of HOA-perfected dullness were now diversified, riotous with natural flowers, medicinal herbs, and edible ground cover. Neighbors who had not spoken in years became conspirators, meeting in workshops disguised as book clubs and potlucks, trading insights about permaculture and hive construction. The Honey Collective expanded. Its residents pooled resources for a local scientist to develop modular hives for rooftop use. Pensioners contributed raw wax for homemade bombs and candles. Adolescents erected and maintained a climate data station in an old treehouse, recording the health of the neighborhood's secret ecosystem. Social media, too, played its double game. The team shared photos, close-ups of pollinators and wild blooms under anonymous identities, captioned with cryptic hashtags. The movement's notoriety rose slowly, then explosively, as a viral post shared a photo of a contraband bee-friendly yard placed against its HOA-mandated grass and shrub neighbor. Viewers around the city, and soon across the country, spoke out, offering messages of support and counsel. A news outlet caught wind, presenting Maple Ridge as the battleground in a greater war between conformity and sustainability. Videos of rain barrels dressed as garden gnomes, yards bursting with pollinator-friendly color, and interviews with bee-resistance moms swamped Facebook and won applause. With every like and share, the pressure on the HOA intensified. Sims doubled down, hiring security to discover transgressions, imposing record fines, and seeking to clamp down by introducing a model yard award for those most obedient to policy. But the spirit of collaboration outpaced control. Residents pooled monies to support their penalized neighbors. Legal volunteers began emailing concerns about property rights and sustainability. Local politicians took interest in the initiative for its grassroots spirit. Even homeowners from surrounding areas, captivated by the Maple Ridge story, initiated covert exchanges, spreading seeds, techniques, and support to those longing for their own off-the-grid refuge. The collective's influence blossomed outward, turning into a regional force for change. The honey now traded hands at weekend farmers markets, and the ideals of off-the-grid living, compost, solar energy, pollinator gardens, found their way into local curricula and city council floor debates. Yet the threats remained substantial. Sims' effort, persistent and unrelenting, produced moments of fear. Neighbors watching security cars glide by, anxious about anonymous tips, scrambling to keep their network out of sight. But every inspection merely increased the connections of solidarity. Secret messages transmitted down the block, support lines for those facing sanctions, and midnight repairs on hidden hive entrances. The boundary between revolt and actual community dissolved, replaced by a sense that the neighborhood was no longer just a postcode. It was an organism, adapting, resisting, and learning to survive together. The chapter finished with Maple Ridge prepared for escalation. Eco-warriors assembling resources for a legal challenge, outside journalists arriving to cover the secret honey movement, and the HOA, rigid and apprehensive, ready for the next wave in a struggle it could hardly contain. Next, the struggle enters a boiling point as outside interest explodes. The collective faces legal threats and public scrutiny, and the residents evaluate the costs and courage of survival in a viral world. As spring deepened, the winds that rocked the carefully drawn barriers around Maple Ridge also carried the aroma of something beyond rebellion, something irrepressible. One story, then 10, then a river of testimonials about the hidden honey collective, the nocturnal gardens, and the rooftop hives spilled over the digital landscape. News teams began setting up at the development's edge, roving their cameras across the strange juxtapositions. Lawns of sterile green beside cascades of wildflowers, solar panels glinting from sun-warmed sheds, and clusters of neighbors chatting beneath the peaceful hum of unseen bee traffic. National morning shows featured pieces about the Maple Ridge movement, branding it the Secret Garden Rebellion. Bloggers and eco-influencers detailed inventive tactics for hiding gardens and legal strategies for opposing HOA encroachment. The collective's own underground media efforts reached new heights, with members establishing a web series to discuss hive designs and urban sustainability techniques. Every new spotlight gave fuel to the combusting story. Every share moved the movement beyond Maple Ridge's bounds. The media attention, welcome and intimidating, prompted a reckoning. Residents weighed the urge to go totally public against the very real hazards of exposure. Legal action from the HOA, conflict among neighbors, and the prospect of public backlash. Protests raged outside monthly HOA meetings as supporters from surrounding communities attended, holding posters, costumed as bumblebees and sunflowers, and yelling for sustainable freedom. Volunteers distributed pamphlets that emphasized the benefits of pollinator havens and renewable energy. Children gave jars of honey, unlabeled but undeniably collective, to reporters as tokens of optimism and proof of what lay at stake. Mr. Sims, concerned by the spectacle and hurt by the sudden weakness of his own directives, grew enraged. He upped his campaign, imposing new fines, threatening litigation, and restricting community facilities like parks and pools for non-compliance. Citations flew at a record speed, given not with a neighborly warning but with the chilly detachment of enforcement. Security patrols patrolled the evenings, hunting for traces of hidden gardening, unlawful composting, or the faintest drone of bees. But the crackdown only unified the rebels. The fines became badges of honor, posted as cautions for the weary and encouragements for the daring. Legal aid rushed in from outside. The collective was now supported by urban gardeners, environmental lawyers, and civil rights organizations anxious for precedent. A pro bono team sprang up, creating a legal case that asserted the HOA's rules were damaging to both the environment and personal property rights, utilizing city codes and new state sustainability mandates imposed in response to climate pressure. The pressure took its toll. Some families, intimidated by the fines and continuous surveillance, scaled back their efforts, hiding their greatest goals in window boxes or keeping everything but a couple jars of honey locked away for the tightest circle of acquaintances. But many more doubled down, seeing the moment as a test of their ideals. The secret message rings buzzed with pleas for extra garden beds, a crowd-funded solar array for the local school, and plans for a public Bee Day festival emphasizing the vital need for pollinators in urban life. Tensions simmered at the following HOA meeting. Residents, encouraged by national backing and the evident fissures in Sims' power, crowded the room. Cameras recorded each phrase. Students brought science fair displays of pollen paths and water cycles, made possible by hidden hives. The board, shocked and divided, failed to present a cohesive face, with many members now advocating for open discussion and reform. Sims clung to his posts and printed policies, increasingly isolated as the air in the room evolved from dread to expectation. Outside, a weird coalition bloomed. Climate organizers, urban farmers, and even city council representatives skirted close, providing support and bargaining in private channels. Vendors at local markets stepped in, marking products as pollinator-powered, and donating gifts to help families overwhelmed by fines. For the first time, Maple Ridge felt part of a movement that was both local and global, historic and future-facing. Social media sealed the occasion. An anonymous member of the collective shared a sweeping drone photo over Maple Ridge, displaying the patchwork of secret gardens, solar installations, and wildflower corridors, an emerald quilt created under the nose of totalitarian authority. The movie, accompanied by music and overlaid with scribbled demands for the right to steward one's patch of earth, erupted online, gathering celebrities, NGOs, and petitions seeking quick legislative reform. The HOA's rigidity was suddenly the joke of talk programs and the topic of editorial cartoons, while the collective's anthem became a model for other areas. Children's faces, painted brilliant for B-Day, flashed on newspapers with the message, "Let us grow." The fight, once secret and frightened, had become a screaming celebration. Yet the last struggle loomed. Judicial hearings, the chance of landmark verdicts, and the task of transforming a viral spectacle into real change. Next, in the courts and neighborhood halls, the fight for sustainable freedom reaches its climax. Residents confront Sims, legal allies pair with eco-pioneers, and Maple Ridge's fate teeters at the edge of a moment that could redefine the entire idea of home. The day before the hearing was damp and dark, pre-dawn tension hammering through the collective's group chat. Overnight rain dropped on Maple Ridge's gardens, erasing sidewalk chalk be pictures but feeding jasmine and mint in concealed beds. Inside the courthouse, energy was bright and viral. A wave of yellow-scarved kids, neighbors with potted zinnias gripped close, and reporters vying for vantage points near the doors. What began as a local enforcement dispute had spun into a legal crisis emphasizing a national debate. Who genuinely controlled the future of American neighborhoods, the boards or the people who lived within them? The proceedings began with the deadpan formality of a procedural tug-of-war. Sims, pressured into a suit, recounted the HOA's regulations, arguing uniformity, safety, and value preservation, demanded the suspension of any non-approved landscaping and livestock. This includes bees, barrel gardens, and solar panels hidden or not. His lawyer unrolled reams of photographs, manicured lawns, bordered beds, and the antiseptic vision of Maple Ridge as it had been for years before the insurgency of dandelions and wild thyme. But the collective's attorney countered with a wave of color and science. Children, standing on step stools behind the witness stand, recounted information about pollination and urban food chains. Seniors detailed the rebirth of songbirds and butterflies. Local scientists produced air and soil tests, contrasting blocks with sustainable procedures to those with relentless turf. Wellness specialists highlighted the anguish and loss created by Sims' unilateral enforcement, relating isolation to the dying off of meeting spaces formerly built around community gardens and apiaries. Crowdsourced cash had paid for expert testimony and a parade of passionate specialists. Environmental statutes, new eco-friendly ordinances, and even certain city green codes were marshaled against the brittle arsenal of HOA bylaws. The collective's lawyer made the point plain. The right to appropriately manage one's home, especially where that stewardship promoted common health and biodiversity, was not merely moral but increasingly protected. Sims watched his support slip with every voice shouted for resilience. On the day the collective showed their living map, a data-rich display of how bees, rainfall, and pollinator pathways had made Maple Ridge the only block in the county with increased wildflower density and lowering urban heat. Even the HOA's erstwhile stalwarts appeared disturbed. News teams videotaped the judge's arched eyebrow as a local grocer detailed his Maple Ridge Pure Honey label, now sought at markets citywide. Out in the halls, smaller dramas unfolded. A Sims loyalist, feeling his confidence flag, accepted a cup of tea sweetened with that same forbidden honey. A tight-lipped neighbor who'd stayed silent all year quietly slipped a wildflower seed packet into her handbag after seeing a child's painting hung in the courthouse corridor. The movement, previously the realm of risk-takers, now pulled in even those unwilling to appear on camera, now that public perception had so fully transformed. The final day of testimony drew an even greater gathering. Council members gathered, some with local ordinances in hand, emphasizing that as the city advanced toward sustainability goals, neighborhoods like Maple Ridge must become friends rather than hurdles. The court listened to closing arguments, floodlights outside filming interviews as the collective's founders explained this was not simply about honey, but about the right for communities to adapt, regenerate, and repair what decades of manicured monotony had injured. Then, after days that felt like years, the judge's ruling rang out. A voice calm and resonant, expressing optimism for all who'd come in dread for those engaged in the HOA's old order. The ban was deemed unenforceable. Maple Ridge and all similar neighborhoods must permit sustainable urban gardening, responsible beekeeping, and the acceptable use of solar and rainwater collection. Bylaws could not override the constitutional and municipal rights to environmental stewardship and local food. The court urged collaboration, calling for new HOA guidelines that supported community well-being instead of mandating uniformity. The crowd's hushed response was astonished with potential, then ecstatic. Reporters beamed live as the community hugged, toddlers waving painted bee masks, and pensioners toasting with honeyed tea. Sims, head bent, was removed from the center of the board as fresh candidates, champions of green living, were nominated on the courthouse steps. Home. The neighborhood erupted in celebration. Flags bearing bees and sunflowers floated from porches. Hives were pulled from hiding and decorated with child-painted emblems of freedom and appreciation. Rain barrels rose tall and bold, no longer concealed. The Maple Ridge Bee Day Festival advertised itself, bringing families from around the region. Yet even in victory, the movement realized that the true work lay ahead. New bylaws had to be drafted, old wounds mended, and the spirit of collaboration and stewardship carefully maintained from the slow creep of apathy or new forms of control. But Maple Ridge was eternally changed, characterized not by lines of grass, but by the live network of trust, adaptation, and optimism that had thrilled beneath the surface all along. Next, the start of a green period, the blossoming of off-the-grid life, and the building of a new legacy, where honey, gardens, and community fill the heart of Maple Ridge, and the narrative becomes a beacon for neighborhoods everywhere. Maple Ridge awakened to a new type of dawn weeks after the momentous court decision, one heavy with the promise of change, the kind that lingers not just in policy, but in the daily routines of existence. The sting of the past was soothed by the hum of bees, the joy of children bouncing over clover-dotted lawns, and the colorful palette of wildflowers now flaunted in every front garden. Slowly, the neighborhood's wounds healed into memory, and the legacy of the Honey Collective became the taproot for a rebuilt way of life. The neighborhood planned its first official Bee Day festival, under a sky streaked with flags and floating music. Families swarmed the main park, sipping local honey from stalls decked with sunflowers and attending courses on rainwater collection, vertical gardening, and sustainable cuisine. The Jensens, the family whose hives had started it all, were celebrated as founders, sharing stories of difficulty, fortitude, and the subtle mysteries of colony life beneath the comb. Their children taught other kids how to detect pollinators and decorate bee stones for the now thriving public pollinator garden. New regulations, created freely with feedback from every home, anchored the neighborhood's change. Residents submitted design proposals for eco-homes, shared heirloom seeds, and started solar co-ops. Each meeting of the reconstituted HOA began with time for neighbor stories. Tales about gardens restored, friendships forged over midnight honey harvests, and memories of fighting for their right to nurture life in all its vibrant unpredictability. Older residents, formerly hesitant, now tended their own vegetable beds and joined compost circles. Skeptics, understanding the mental and physical health benefits of off-the-grid living, became ardent defenders of communal stewardship. Children, growing up surrounded by living classrooms, took lessons in ecology and activism as naturally as they once played make-believe. Teens organized garden day cleanups, passing along not only equipment but also the mythology of resistance and resurrection. The narrative of Maple Ridge traveled much beyond the gravel-lined alleys of the block. News sources branded the area as a pattern for grassroots transformation. City officials contacted its leaders for urban sustainability plans. Local schools adopted the bee curriculum in science courses. Social media campaigns tracked pollen pathways all throughout the city, celebrating not simply the struggle won in court, but the hope seeded in every backyard and alley. Mr. Sims, having stepped aside, spent time tending a little herb garden at the edge of his own now uniform grass. The new HOA board, a coalition of long-standing homeowners and eco-pioneers, treasured his counsel for stability, even as fresh faces pushed the block toward ever wilder vistas. Each season now brought a celebration. Spring pollinator walks with festival floats, fall honey harvests in the collective orchard, poetry readings inspired by the changing foliage, and potlucks lit with lanterns made of beeswax. The rain barrels and solar arrays, formerly outlawed, became local sources of pride, their silent work sustaining families and feeding stories for the next generation. In all these changes, Maple Ridge came to exemplify not just perseverance against coerced conformity, but a living vision of what neighborhoods could be. Its gardens stimulated inquiry, its hives inspired poetry and research, and its collective daring made it possible for communities everywhere to defy the stifling of hope and choose collaboration over control. As evening sank over another day, the hum of bees lingered in the golden air, assuring that even in the face of hardship and struggle, unity and care would always find their way home.